Live and on demand, this is WNY News Now.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us, West New York News Now. Last week we attended a media advisory discussing the Birds and Bees Act, which aims to ban certain pesticides known as neonicotinoids, or neonics. So we'll take a quick commercial break, after which we'll have our First Defense weather segment, and then we'll play the meeting for you.
Catch your First Defense forecast daily on WNY News Now.
EagleZip.com is your local one-stop shop for all of your home and business computer needs. Located on Fluvan Avenue Extension, just outside of Jamestown, EagleZip.com sells and services all brands of desktops and laptops, as well as servers and network equipment for your business. All new computer sales include transferring your data from your old computer, plus a 2-year warranty. Call EagleZip.com today.
Stop by EagleZip.com today and let us make computers easy for you.
Slow down.
Slow down and move over.
Move over.
When you see signs,
Lights. Vests.
Please, give us some room.
Slow down. Slow down and move over.
When you need help,
It's our job
To help you.
to save you.
despite the danger.
This danger is real. Do your part.
Please.
Slow down. Slow down. And move over.
Move over.
If you want to speak truth to the masses, make it funny for the classes.
Catch your First Defense forecast daily on WNY News Now.
Welcome back to WNY News Now. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get right into it. First, let's talk about the advisories and the warnings. National Weather Service has issued a winter storm warning for Chautauqua County in western New York until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Winter storm warning also in place for southern Erie and Crawford County in Pennsylvania. That will go until 1 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. And then the rest of the region is pretty much under a winter weather advisory that includes Cattaraugus County, Erie County, Wyoming County in western New York, as well as McKean and Potter County in Pennsylvania, excluding Allegheny County in western New York. Within the winter storm warning, we're looking at possibly anywhere upwards of 6 to 12 inches of snow in the most persistent snow bands within the advisory area across western New York, maybe about 4 to 6 inches of snow, and then about 2 to 4 inches of snow across McKean and Warren County in Pennsylvania. And I'll have a more in-depth look at those snowfall totals in just a moment. First, the almanac for today made it to a high of 45 degrees yesterday in the city of Jamestown. Our low was 40. The records for today, 57, the record high set back in 1984. The record low, -3, set back in 1926. So here's future scan over the next 24 to 48 hours. We'll have some widespread snow through the evening hours tonight, and then it'll kind of focus on lake effect across the southern tier in northwestern Pennsylvania. This will be mainly an overnight snow event, because by the time tomorrow rolls around lunchtime, that lake effect snow will be coming to an end as drier air builds into the region. And the rest of tomorrow afternoon will be mainly dry with mostly cloudy skies, maybe a few scattered snow showers remaining. But for the most part, this lake effect snow event will be done by lunchtime tomorrow. And then Tuesday night into Wednesday is looking mainly dry with partly to mostly cloudy skies. And then as we head into Wednesday, looking like a pretty dry day on Wednesday with more sunshine across the region. So here's your forecast for your Tuesday in full detail. Snow will end by lunchtime tomorrow with a few leftover scattered flurries in the afternoon, otherwise mostly cloudy skies. High temperatures tomorrow will struggle to make it out of the mid to upper 20s, with maybe a couple lower 30s in some spots, and a northwest wind of 10 to 20 miles per hour. Here's a look at more in depth of those snowfall totals. So from Jamestown points eastward into Cattaraugus County, maybe about 4 or 5 inches of snow. Getting out towards Olean, maybe about 2 to 3 inches of snow. Across Warren, McKean County, about 3 to 5 inches of snow. The highest snowfall totals will be across the Chautauqua Ridge of Chautauqua County and the highest hilltops in the Erie and Crawford County, where we're looking at maybe 6 to 10 inches of snow, maybe a little bit higher in the most persistent snow bands. And right near the immediate Lake Erie shoreline, Erie up to the Dunkirk area, about 3 to 5 inches of snow through Wednesday morning. The rest of that 7-day outlook powered by Ultimate Solutions. So after tomorrow, we're pretty much dry through the rest of the week and into the weekend. There might be a weak system that tries to bring some light rain, snow showers Friday night into Saturday, but it looks relatively weak at this point, so I didn't put anything in the forecast. Temperatures return back into the mid to upper 30s Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Then we're in the lower 40s for Saturday and Sunday. So after Tuesday, this is our best chance of seeing a white Christmas. And any snow that does accumulate over the next 24 hours will probably likely melt by the time Christmas rolls around next Monday. And as of now, Christmas is looking mainly dry with temperatures in the mid 40s. That's a far cry from all the snow and cold air we had for Christmas last year.
All right, welcome everyone. My name is Caitlin Ferrante. I am the Conservation Program Manager with the Sierra Club Atlantic chapter. We are here today to speak in support of the Birds and Bees Protection Act, which curbs needless uses of the neurotoxic neonicotinoid pesticides, also known as neonics. Neonics are the most ecologically destructive pesticides since DDT. They drive mass losses of bees. They're linked to lower production of top state crops like apples, but also effectively hollow out ecosystems from the bottom up. They pollute our waterways all across the state, and they widely appear in New Yorkers' bodies at ever increasing rates. Overwhelming scientific evidence, which my colleagues will talk about today, and real world experience show that 80 to 90% of the neonics used in New York aren't providing any economic benefits to users or are easily replaced with safer alternatives. So those are the uses that the Birds and Bees Protection Act targets, particularly neonic-coated corn and soybean seeds, the largest and most widespread uses of these toxic pesticides, and one which DEC exercises zero regulatory control over because of legal loopholes. So yesterday evening, Governor Hochul called for the Birds and Bees Protection Act, and it was delivered to her desk. So we now have until December 23rd for her to sign or veto this bill. If folks have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to hold a question and answer at the end. We do have a very diverse and long list of speakers today, all really passionate about the bill. And I am going to kick it off to our first speaker, who is the bill sponsor, Senator Hoylman-Siegel.
Thank you, Caitlin. State Senator Brad Hoylman-Siegel here. I represent the west side of Manhattan from Christopher Street up to 103. And really glad to be here and want to thank first the Sierra Club for all your leadership in getting this bill through the state legislature. As was mentioned just yesterday, our legislation was delivered to the governor. I hope that's a good sign, but we're not sure of its fate at this point. But we're here today to raise the alarm that this bill should be signed. The Birds and Bees Protection Act. We need to fight neonicotinoids, which are increasingly found to be the most ecological destructive pesticides since DDT. Just this May, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency found that neonicotinoids are driving hundreds of species toward extinction. And it's no wonder that Europe has already banned these chemicals in agriculture since 2018. Our legislation, the bill I carry with Assembly Member Deborah Glick, would be one of the first nation-leading bills to address neonic seed coatings. But because it was delivered yesterday to the governor, we have to be louder than ever. Neonicotinoids kill our crucial pollinators. They're nerve agents, folks, and they're also linked to a host of health problems in humans, including neurological damage and birth defects. Our legislation, the Birds and Bees Protection Act, would eliminate 80 to 90% of the neonicotinoids entering New York's environment each year by restricting their use in crops where they make little impact on yields and stopping their use outside of agriculture. I'm proud the legislature passed this bill after years of back and forth, which is the result of fearless and determined advocacy on the part of many allies, including our Assembly sponsor, the chair of the Environmental Conservation Committee, Assemblymember Glick. I want to thank Senator Pete Harcum, who's the chair of the Environmental Conservation Committee in the Senate, Assembly Member Salage, the NRDC, the Citizens Campaign for the Environment, and of course, our host today, the Sierra Club. I'm so proud to be part of this coalition of dedicated environmental champions. And I hope Governor Hochul sees the light, signs this bill into law, and makes New York agriculture safer and stronger than ever. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Senator. Our next speaker is Dr. Phil Landrigan. He is the professor, a pediatrician and professor emeritus of preventative medicine and pediatrics at the School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York, and professor and director for the program for global public health and the common good in Boston College. Thank you very much, Dr. Landrigan.
Caitlin, thank you for having invited me to speak. Senator Hoylman, I'd like to thank you and Assemblymember Glick for your leadership and having supported this, sponsored this bill. It's just so important to have elected officials to step out. I'm going to speak today from the perspective of a pediatrician. So I practiced pediatrics for 33 years in New York at Mount Sinai School of Medicine, where we had a major program looking at the effects of toxic chemicals on children's health, starting with lead, and over the years moving into air pollution, dealing with the fallout from 9/11, and pesticides. The reason I'm concerned about the neonicotinoid insecticides is that these chemicals are deliberately engineered. They're artificial chemicals, synthetic chemicals. They're deliberately engineered to attack the brain and the central nervous system. They're nerve agents. That's how they kill insects. And because we humans share quite a bit of biology with other species on this planet, including the very same receptors in the brain that the neonicotinoids attack in the insects, we humans, are also vulnerable to these chemicals. And within the human population, the group that is most susceptible to these toxic chemicals are infants in the womb during the 9 months of pregnancy and children in the first couple of years after life. And the reason infants and young children are so vulnerable to neonicotinoids and other neurotoxic chemicals is that infants' brains are growing and developing at a remarkable rate through incredibly complex, highly choreographed processes that are just so easily disrupted when a harmful chemical gets into them. And unfortunately, we know from studies that CDC and others have conducted that exposure of pregnant women and therefore of their unborn children to these chemicals is widespread. A couple of years ago, CDC did a survey. They found measurable quantities of neonicotinoids in 95% of women in New York State. It means basically every pregnant woman in the state is exposed to these chemicals that have the potential to cause brain injury and other birth defects to their children. And clinical studies of children exposed to neonicotinoids have shown autism-like symptoms, decreased IQ, other neurological injuries. The situation here reminds me a lot of the situation with childhood lead poisoning 40 or 50 years ago. At that point in time, we knew that very high levels of lead caused obvious brain damage to children, convulsions, coma, sometimes even death. And back then, the lead industry said, oh, there's no such thing as silent lead poisoning. If lead doesn't cause gross symptoms, it doesn't harm children. Well, we know that that's wrong. 40 years of research have shown that the lead industry's claims were wrong, that lead causes damage to children's brains at every single level that can be measured. Both CDC and the World Health Organization have now declared that no level, zero level of lead in the blood of a child is safe. So we're at a similar point here with the neonicotinoids. The pesticide industry, of course, is going to argue that we need more research, that any legislation limiting the use of neonics is premature. I think that's wrong-headed, because if Governor Hochul fails to sign this bill, it means that children will continue in New York will continue for many years to come to continue to be exposed to these toxic chemicals, to continue to be at risk of damage. So for the sake of New York's children, for the sake of New York's future, I urge the governor to sign this legislation and give the children of New York a present for Christmas. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Landrigan. Our next speaker is Dr. Maida Galvez, pediatrician and professor of environmental medicine and public health and pediatrics at the School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York. Thank you very much, Dr. Galvez, for joining us today.
Thank you, Ms. Ferrante, and thank you to Senator Brad Hoylman-Siegel, Assemblymember Glick, and Dr. Landrigan, and all of you joining us today. I'm honored to be with you all. I am Dr. Maida Galvez, and I am a pediatrician and a professor of environmental medicine and public health and pediatrics here at Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. I'm also here today representing the New York State American Academy of Pediatrics, District 2, Chapter 3. And as an environmental pediatrician, I wholeheartedly support the elimination of harmful and unnecessary uses of neonicotinoid pesticides, or neonics, here in New York State and beyond. Hopefully we will be the first. I am humbled that my remarks follow those of Dr. Phil Landrigan, an international leader and pioneer of the field of children's environmental health, whose career has been dedicated to promoting healthy environments for all children and their families. And given his words, which I fully support, I'm here today to specifically speak to concerns for New York State families. Neonic exposure in New York is rampant and it's growing. And a recent letter signed by environmental health scientists, clinicians, and public health professionals, including myself, cited the growing evidence of widespread and increasing exposures to neonics to New York's residents. Dr. Landrigan mentioned the CDC's monitoring, which found over half the US population had traces of neonics in the urine. And in a more recent study from 2017 to 2020, testing of those pregnant women across New York, 4 additional states, and Puerto Rico has detected neonics in over 95% of participants, with higher rates of exposure in Hispanic women. Neonic levels were higher than in earlier CDC monitoring and have steadily increased over the 4 years of the study in both level and frequency of detection. Given these widespread exposures and the subsequent neurotoxic risks to wildlife and to the health of New Yorkers, and especially children, the most important clinical intervention is prevention of exposures to neonics in the first place. This is only possible with assigning the Birds and Bees Protection Act into law. This act would significantly reduce direct neonic exposure where children live, learn, and play, including in treated lawns and parks, as well as New York's drinking water sources, which federal and state testing show are now polluted with neonics, especially in places like Long Island. Drinking water contamination presents a significant exposure concern, given that conventional water treatment generally fails to remove neonics. Infants are at higher risk, as they may be exposed to both contaminated baby food as well as formula made with contaminated water. I therefore strongly urge New York to sign the Birds and Bees Protection Act into law as is, to firmly demonstrate our commitment, New York's strong commitment to protecting the health of all New Yorkers for future generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Galvez. Our next speaker is Megan Boone, actress and activist.
I'm incredibly honored to speak today on behalf of people like myself who live, work, and raise children in New York in the midst of environmental breakdown. The stakes could not be higher for those in my community who have entrusted me to give voice to the imperative that Governor Hochul sign the Birds and Bees Protection Act to counter the power of the Monsanto lobby and the Farmers Bureau pressuring our governor to veto it. Governor Hochul, this bill goes beyond protecting birds and bees. So I'd like to address you from the people whose only power in this state is the one vote we cast to re-elect you, directly to you, Governor Hochul, from mother to mother. On a morning in late September, I walked my 7-year-old daughter to school in the rain, fully preparing her with a small, manageable umbrella, raincoat, and rubber boots. It was only a day or so after New York City's Climate Week had concluded when the walk became more and more treacherous for us. And if you're wondering what this has to do with the Birds and Bees Protection Act, I assure you it has everything to do with protection. And scientists can draw a direct line between this walk to school and the companies that prop up industrial agricultural methods and seek to bury this necessary regulatory action. We were dodging rivers in the streets, moments away from a deluge. By the time she got to school, her wellies were filled with water to the brim and her clothes were soaked. Upon returning home to get dry clothes for her, a flash flood warning ordering me to remain in place popped up on my phone. The regulatory instrument that has been sitting in limbo on your desk, Governor Hochul, the Birds and Bees Protection Act, seeks to ban a pesticide, a product of Monsanto, that sell it primarily for large-scale industrial corn and soy production, predominantly used not to directly feed humans in need of affordable but poisoned nutrition, but as feed to fatten up livestock for the kill in the cruel industrial meat production, abusing animals and emitting a third of the heat-trapping gases destabilizing the precipitation and storm activity in our region and around the world. Our communities do not need this corn. Governor Hochul, I decided to stay home that day in late September, thinking my daughter needed her mother to stay safe more than she needed dry clothes and shoes, the kinds of daunting calculations the average New York mother has to make in a state you govern. I spent most of my day shoveling water away from the doors of the home I spent my entire life working to afford. We are losing everything we have worked so hard to build. Governor Hochul, mother to mother, whether it comes to fighting for clean energy infrastructure or banning industrial agricultural practices, you have to stop being timid with your power and seize it to preserve a world for our children who are part of a vast web of life already imperiled. Sign the Birds and Bees Protection Act, not just to protect the farmers that the Farmers Bureau doesn't represent, who are working with regenerative practices, doing the right thing, and are part of the solution, and will be kneecapped if this pesticide persists to endanger the necessary ecosystem functions they rely on. In fact, kneecapping 200 plus species on the brink of extinction at a time when ecosystem collapse is already bearing down on all of us and will accelerate into our children's future. Governor Hochul, a state-funded report by Cornell University found neonics' highly toxic components have a, quote, lengthy persistence in our environment and, quote, do not consistently increase expected net income compared to untreated seeds. So what are the Farmers Bureau lobbyists pushing you to veto this bill really clinging to, if not the farmers? When we got our daughter home from school, the day of the flash flood, I was dismayed to learn her entire second grade class spent the day in wet clothes and without shoes. A few days later, I learned that a colleague in the work of environmental protection, Ed Nugent, watched as his daughter was swept away by the flood, drowning her. Governor Hochul, fight against the entrenched power that got all of us into this mess.
Thank you very much, Megan. Our next speaker is going to be Laura Colligan, farmer and co-owner of Dirt Ridge Farm in Springville, New York, and president of the Good Farmers Guild of Western New York. Thank you very much, Laura, for joining.
Hi, I'm happy to be here today. And I just want to point out that I am speaking to you from Springville, New York, which is really near Hamburg, Governor Hochul's hometown. It's actually where I sell a lot of my vegetables at the farmers market. We know that Governor Hochul is facing pressure to veto or gut the Birds and Bees Protection Act on behalf of New York farmers. But my question is, which farmers? New York is home to a wide array of farmers growing a wide array of crops and using various practices. We have larger scale conventional apple growers who are a huge part of our agricultural economy. We have small and medium scale organic and conventional vegetable and berry growers who are growing for local and regional customers, both in New York State and in upstate. We are feeding our communities healthy food that they need. Farmers like us need pollinators and other beneficial insects and bugs to produce our food, to pollinate our crops, but also to fight pests that would harm our crops and to cycle nutrients as earthworms do. But unfortunately, the practices of our neighbors using neonics are putting all of this at risk, our ability to feed our communities and to have healthy, thriving ecosystems on our farms. The seed coatings of neonicotinoid-treated crops leach into the groundwater and move into other areas where the crop was not planted. And the plants on my farm could be taking up neonicotinoids from other farmers nearby and poisoning my crops for the pollinators and other insects that I rely on. But the thing is, neonicotinoids are not helping conventional corn and soy growers either, according to the Cornell study. They're being used as basically an insurance policy against a problem that does not largely exist, and for which there are other alternatives which are widely used in places like Quebec and are cheaper, and also for which Cornell is developing non-toxic practices, like correct planting dates to avoid the pests these pesticides are supposed to be guarding against in the first place, and thus negating the need for them at all. So if it's not helping conventional farmers, and it's only costing them money that they don't need to be spending, and it's putting the livelihoods of other farmers who need pollinators at risk, why are we still using these products? To me, it seems like the Birds and Bees Protection Act is a win-win for agriculture and the environment, and signing this bill into law as is should be an easy decision for Governor Hochul.
Thank you so much, Laura. Our next speaker is Emily Ann Watson, co-owner of Plan B Farm Brewery in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Hi, I'm glad to be here today and to help support this act. I own a 25-acre organic farm in the Hudson Valley where we grow ingredients that we turn into alcohol, into beer. A big part of what we do is we've been trying to encapsulate what a regional alcoholic beverage would taste like. And we've been in business for 10 years, and we did this through our apiary. So our bees are foraging typically within a 2 to 5 mile radius of our farm. We try to provide as much nectar sources for them on the farm directly so that we can keep our girls safe and that we know that they are not coming into contact with these neonics if possible. But I can't control that range of foraging. And we have seen, unfortunately, it's been just a consistent part of our business that our hives are continuously failing, and we have to start them over again every year. I'm sure there's a lot of pressures, but of course, with neonics, when they leave their apiary and they forage, if they come into contact with these neonics, it usually causes them it attacks their brains, and it makes it, they can't remember how to get back to the hive, and they'll end up dying alone on somebody else's property, which is helping contribute to their collapse. And it's so important to my business and to my ability to feed my family and to continue my livelihood, to have our apiaries be strong. And not only that, but we plant so much, we have so much wild, we plant a lot of clover and nectar sources, again, to try to keep our girls on our property, to protect them. But we also have a lot of natural pollinators that come to our fields, which we try to keep a lot of them wild, because our farm is an old farm that's never been conventionally farmed. So it's never had the introduction of any sort of pesticides or herbicides, which makes the soil health incredibly strong. And we have this beautiful rotation of natural foraging, forage available. And it goes through these spring, summer, fall cycles that provide a lot of nectar sources for native pollinators. And we see a ton of diversity in the birds that come to our place. And we want to continue to provide a safe haven for those insects and for those birds. And while I can control what I put on my property and my soil, I can't control what my fellow neighbors are putting into the system. And it does threaten my livelihood. And quite honestly, my business, if I don't have bees, then we don't have beer. So it's very important to us that we see this act put into power in our state in order to protect me and my family and my livelihood.
Thank you so much, Emily. Our next speaker is Sophia Longsworth, Campaign Manager of Clean and Healthy.
Thank you, Caitlin. Good morning, everyone. Here at Clean and Healthy, we work toward turning off the tap on toxic chemicals to protect the people of New York. I'm a mother, as many of you on this call are. Governor Kathy Hochul is a mother. She's the first governor to hold the esteemed and sacred role of being a mother. At the State of the State earlier this year, she reminded us of this. And the role of being a mother is to protect our children. She vowed to protect the children of New York from toxic chemicals, and we're grateful to her for the work she's done in that regard so far. Here we are today talking about another toxic chemical that research has shown is dangerous to public health, yes, but most importantly, dangerous to the health of the most vulnerable group of the population, our children. The reason we at Clean and Healthy are supportive of this bill is because of the many sectors it impacts: the pollinators, wildlife and other animals, the environment, and human health. We all know that whatever is in our environment eventually gets into our bodies. Toxic neonics are getting into the water that we drink and the food that we eat. And I'm so glad that we heard from experts, Dr. Landrigan and Dr. Galvez, who explained how these neonics work in our bodies when they bind to receptors in our brain and the central nervous system that are responsible for a range of important functions, including memory, learning, mood, and speech. There is no reason to gamble with the health and development of children when the science has already told us what the outcome will be. Neonics have already been found in 30% of groundwater on Long Island, in 95% of pregnant mothers, and has been linked to birth defects, neurological challenges, and stillbirth, as Dr. Landrigan said. As a mother, I hope that the messages today resonate with the governor and that she keeps her promise to protect the children of New York by signing the Birds and Bees Protection Act into law. Thank you.
Sophia, thank you so much. And to bring us home is Adrian Esposito, the Executive Director at Citizens Campaign for the Environment.
Good morning, everyone. It's almost afternoon. Here's the bottom line. The bottom line is this bill is not only designed to protect the most important species on the planet, which is bees, but it's also designed to protect public health. We know that neonicotinoids are the most common pesticide found here in Long Island's groundwater. In fact, that's an honor that we don't want to have. We have 121 pesticides found in Long Island's drinking water supply. And as I said, neonicotinoids are the most common one out of the 121. That's a concern. So when we say we want to save the bees and we want to protect public health, that means we have to reduce our exposure. But we can't reduce our exposure if it's in our drinking water and an everyday routine. Who supports this bill? Well, in addition to public health scientists, like we have with us today, in addition to environmentalists, in addition to farmers, in addition to breweries, you know who supports this bill? The public. The public supports this bill. Thousands and thousands of people have emailed and written to Governor Hochul saying, please sign the Birds and Bees Protection Act. We need bees. People understand the importance of pollinators in our food supply, in our ecology, and on this planet. And this is a great opportunity to be a leader. Canada has done it, Europe has done it, and now we want New York to do it. So we're imploring Governor Hochul to sign this bill. The clock is ticking. We've worked on this legislation for 5 years. It is thoughtfully crafted. It's a strategically written bill that will only affect 3 different crops as well as ornamental use for neonicotinoids. It's smart, it's strategic, it's decisive, but it's also meaningful and will have substance in everyday lives of the public, and it will save the bees. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. All right, so now we are going to open it up for question and answer. You should be able to unmute yourself if you have a question you'd like to ask.
Hi there, my name is Alex Galt. I'm a reporter with the Watertown Daily Times. First, I want to say thank you for calling this press conference and talking about the importance of this bill. Just wanted to ask, when it comes to the history of neonics, like how long have they been used in New York? And when did this issue of them coming into our water supply really start to become apparent?
Well, let me just chime in just from a Long Island perspective. The neonicotinoids were first permitted in, trying to remember the date, but the significance of it is that 5 years after imidacloprid, which is a type of neonicotinoid, was introduced into Long Island, within 5 years, it was found throughout the groundwater supply. So it's very mobile and it's very persistent in groundwater. And that's one of the particular challenges about this particular pesticide.
And I can defer to Dan Rochelle from NRDC as well. I believe it was the mid-90s, but I defer to Dan.
So the mid-90s was when EPA first approved the first neonic. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at when DEC first approved use in New York. But one thing to note is that DEC approval doesn't necessarily stop neonics from being used in New York State. So actually DEC in the mid-2000s refused to permit clothianidin, which is a neonic, and yet it's the second most used neonic in New York State because there is a massive regulatory loophole for neonic treated seeds. DEC does not regulate neonic coatings on seeds. So basically the seed is treated in Iowa, it's sold into New York, and DEC says, I don't see a pesticide. So some of the largest uses of these chemicals are, again, chemicals that DEC explicitly refused to permit in New York State.
Thank you, Dan. Are there any other questions?
Hi, my name's Emily Kenny. I'm a reporter with Spectrum News in Syracuse. This is kind of a long-winded question, but bear with me. So advocates or lobbyists that are opposed to the bill have said things like seed treatments are a more environmentally friendly way of using these pesticides rather than they would broadly spray fields. Additionally, they've pointed out that, or in their opinion, that corn is mostly pollinated by the wind and wheat and soybeans are self-pollinating plants. Do you have a response to that, their points? And also, why have those been chosen as specific crops that are banned? The seed treatments would be banned rather than like flowering plants.
So this is Laura Colligan. I'll take part of this, and then I hope that Dan or someone else will take the rest of this. The reason why, as I understand it, the bill focuses on corn and soy is because this is where these seed treatments are being used. People aren't selling, as far as I know, neonic treated squash seed. which is a flowering plant. But it is selling, they are selling corn seed. So these, these are where these crops, this is where most of the neonics in our environment are coming from. And as I mentioned, these and others have mentioned, the coating moves off of the seed. Water washes it off of the seed and into the surrounding area, which other plants can take it up. And so I believe even on some organic produce where neonics are not permitted, it has been found because these plants take up the water, which has the neonicotinoids, and then the neonicotinoid is systematically found throughout the entire plant. And so that is some of the reasoning. And I hope someone else can jump in too.
I can maybe hop on there too. And there's hopefully this is not a long-winded answer. But yeah, I think Laura said it exactly right. I mean, most of the neonic use in New York State is coatings on corn and soybean seeds. And one of the reasons that the bill is so narrow, and mind you, the bill doesn't even prevent other neonic use on corn and soybeans. It's literally just those seed coatings. And that's because Cornell University did a report that came out in 2020, looked at over 1,100 peer-reviewed papers. This was actually a report commissioned by the state. It grew out of Governor Cuomo's pollinator task force. So the state commissioned Cornell to look at this issue, and they found that these neonic coatings on corn, soybean, and wheat seeds, again, the largest use in the state, pose substantial risks to pollinators, but no economic benefits to farmers. And those findings have been confirmed in additional field research across the state from Cornell that's available on their website. It's also confirmed in real-world experience. Quebec and Ontario effectively phased out neonic coatings on corn and soybean seeds since 2019. And there's been no associated cases of crop loss or switching to more harmful alternatives. So both the science and the real-world experience show that these coatings are not necessary, and that's most of the problem. So it seems to be the low-hanging fruit and sort of the win-win. Again, I think one other thing just to note here, the effectiveness window for these seeds is very narrow at the beginning of the season, only a couple of weeks. And so there's not really evidence that I've seen that these neonic coatings have actually replaced other spraying later in the season. And in fact, the science would suggest that they haven't. And again, what Laura says in terms of right, these are crops that are not pollinated. So why are we worried about bees visiting, corn and soybean plants? The problem is, when these seeds are used, you have to understand the nature of them. They're designed to permeate plants, to get into the roots, pollen, nectar, everything, and basically to make the plant itself toxic, to make the plant itself the pesticide. So that's why they're painted on the corn seed. They're soaked up through the roots. Only 2% make it into the target plant. The other 95+% stays in the environment where they are highly mobile, moving every time there's a rain event, irrigation, etc., moving into new soil, contaminating that soil, contaminating plant life, as Adrian talked about, contaminating water supplies, and they persist for a long time. So what we have is a buildup of toxicity in the environment that's constantly spreading out and extremely available to bees and other pollinators.
Yeah, and just to kind of sum that up real quick, we just think it's not more environmentally friendly to have seed coated where only 2 to 5% of the pesticide is absorbed by the target plant and 95% remains in our environment and gets into our drinking water. We think it's wasteful and dangerous.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adrienne. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, just briefly, obviously the bill's been sent to, this is Marie with Politico. So the bill's been sent to the governor, just from the advocates, or perhaps if there are any lawmakers on the call. What are you hearing about potential chapter amendments? Is the governor giving any signaling about her interest in signing the bill this year?
Well, this is Senator Hoylman Siegel, the Senate sponsor, and I don't know if the Assembly member is here, but we remain open to discussing amendments. The governor's team has not put forward any at this juncture. It'll be disappointing, to say the least, if the bill is vetoed without a conversation, especially when the advocates all gathered here today have made such a persuasive case to my colleagues. And finally, the Assembly and the Senate matched a bill that went through both houses after debate on the floor of both the Assembly and the Senate. We think it's, New York should be nation leading, but we would not be the first state to address neonicotinoids. New Jersey and other states have well, but I hope that the governor sees the trend here and that New York gets ahead of it to protect both our pollinators and human health from neonicotinoids.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or any last words from folks? If not, we are going to have this recorded. We'll be circulating to our press lists.
So I could put this in a quick historical context. So we've basically been dealing with pesticides in the United States for 100 years. Back in the early years of the 20th century, the main pesticide used was lead arsenate, and it was heavily used on apple crops. And because arsenic is an element, it still persists in the ground in certain places around the country, like the Wenatchee Valley in Washington State, and some of the sugarcane fields in the American South that were previously cotton fields, because arsenic's an element, it doesn't break down. Lead arsenate was followed in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s by DDT. And DDT, of course, was the subject of Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring. What we saw with DDT back in the 60s and 70s was that it almost drove two critical bird species to extinction, ospreys and bald eagles. More recently, long-term follow-up studies have shown that women who were exposed to DDT back then in their mother's wombs in the 1960s are today, a half century later and more, at increased risk of breast cancer. Because of those dangers, EPA banned DDT in the early 1970s. Along came the organochlorine and the organophosphate compounds. The organophosphates, like chlorpyrifos, were initially hailed as safe compounds, caused no damage. That claim proved to be false. They proved to be neurotoxic. They caused brain damage to children. Multiple studies have now linked early life exposure to organophosphate pesticides to IQ loss, behavioral disturbances in children. So in the 1980s and 1990s, Bayer Monsanto brought out the neonicotinoids with the express purpose of replacing the organophosphate pesticides. And again, the claim was that these pesticides are safe. And now here we are again, 15, 20 years after that introduction of these chemicals. Once again, we're seeing that the chemicals are dangerous. This whole phenomenon, this deja vu all over again, has been described as the pesticide treadmill. And time and again, chemicals have been introduced. They yield substantial profits for the manufacturers. They impose great costs upon the farmers. They yield little in the way of economic benefit to farmers, as we've heard today from several sources. And they have all sorts of consequences. They poison the birds, they poison the bees, they poison the children. I think it's really time to get off. It's really time to get off the pesticide treadmill. It's time to end the unnecessary use of neonicotinoids in New York State. And I urge the governor, as I said before, for the sake of New York's children, to sign this bill into law. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Landrigan. If there are no other questions, if that's it, we will, like I said, circulate this to everyone. I appreciate everyone for joining. and appreciate all the speakers so much. Hopefully we will have something to celebrate right before Christmas, and we can hopefully urge the governor to sign this into law. So thank you so very much, everyone. Appreciate you all, and we will talk soon.
Well, that's going to be it for us today. I'd like to thank you all for watching. News continues 24/7 at WNYNewsNow.com and on our mobile app. You can download it today for free in the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. We're also on Channel 716 on Roku and at channel716.com. Thank you for watching.